episode of the Märklin Outsider, and I'm Anthony Dodge. And in today's episode, I want to talk about this. Now, I know I've done several videos on Märklin C-Track, talked about the positives and the negatives of it, why I like it, how it's really great, especially for beginners to get into. I'm not here to specifically talk about Märklin C-Track or c-gleis. I'm here to talk about one particular piece, and that's this fella right here. This is Märklin article number 24130, and if you remember previous videos, the 24 means track, the 30 at the end means it's a 30-degree arc, which means you need 6 of them to make a 180-degree semicircle. But what we care about is that number in the middle, the number 1. This is Märklin Radius 1 curve. And to all Märklin enthusiasts, well, maybe not all, but to most Märklin enthusiasts, it is controversial. How can such a little piece of track that has so many things going for it, the ease of installation, the sturdiness, etc., how can it be controversial? Well, this little piece creates a massive problem to model train people that like Märklin. Why is this piece so controversial? Because it causes Märklin to make a business decision which aggravates a lot of model train enthusiasts, especially era 5 and 6 enthusiasts. You see, this is the narrowest radius you can get in model trains. And because of this, which is included in every single start set of track you can get, any expansion set of track that comes with curves comes with radius 1 curves. And because of this, Märklin makes its modern era 5 and 6 and maybe even into era 4, makes all its passenger cars to, instead of 187 true HO scale, it makes them at anywhere from 1 to 93 to 1 to 100 scale. In other words, they're smaller than they're supposed to be compared to everything else in HO scale. Märklin's newest superstar to come this year, the ICE4, they made their ICE4 passenger cars along with their predecessor, the ICE3 passenger cars, and some of the high-speed Swiss SBB passenger cars. They're making them at not accurate scale. They're not making their passenger cars and even some locomotives to 193.5 scale, and in some cases even up to 198, but their primary Maßstab, as it's called, is 1 to 93.5, so that it can go around these curves. Those passenger cars, if done at 187 scale, at regular speeds, running speeds, will often derail or get hung up on these narrower radius. In fact, radius 1 is so unpopular that many companies don't even make radius 1 curves anymore. But Märklin shortens their cars, makes them at a smaller length scale, so the proportions are slightly off, so that they can still use radius 1. Now, Rocco, Brava, Jägendorfer, and Pico make the vast majority of their Eras 5 and 6 passenger cars. They now make them at true 187 scale. Märklin doesn't. Now, if it's shorter cars from older eras, then they make them at regular 187 scale. But the newer, longer passenger cars, Märklin makes at a 1 to 93.5 scale. Some they've done at different scales, but generally it's been 1 to 93.5. And this is aggravating to people who want their things to be accurate to scale. Some people don't care. When I got into the hobby, I didn't even know that, so I didn't know the difference. Looking at a ICE 3, I'm looking over at my ICE 3s over there right now. Looking at my ICE 3s, I wouldn't have known they were shorter, so maybe it's not a big deal. So why does Märklin do this? Why do they shorten it? Well, Märklin has several explanations, many of which almost sound logical. I don't want to go through them all. I'm going to go through what I consider to be the real reasons. Number one, all model train companies started with basically radius 1 curves. Now Märklin has a whole algorithm. I'll try to put up a picture here again, how the different curves are different widths. But basically, it goes back to when model trains came out. They were designed, especially for HO, to fit in a small area. Little Wilhelm, or Billy in America, little Willy over there in Dusseldorf or Hamburg or München. He's going to lay it on his bedroom floor, play with it, and then put it away when he's done playing with it. So you needed it to be relatively tight. Whether it was intended or not, radius 1 curves fit a 2 foot wide, and I know the Germans do metric, but radius 1 curves fit a 2 foot wide table almost perfectly. It's almost like it was designed for the standard 2 by 4 foot modular arrangement that a lot of clubs and that have. You know, everybody builds a 2 foot by 4 foot section. So 2 foot wide seemed to be perfect. So, you know, it made sense. It was a tabletop enterprise originally. And Märklin stayed with it. So to this day, Märklin still includes radius 1 in all their train starter sets. So that whether a young person or a beginning adult can lay it out in a relatively small area and run their trains. And you can understand that, I think. I mean, you can see the logic in that. And until the 1980s, most passenger cars weren't long, or that long that they are today. So radius 1 wasn't a big deal. But as bigger trains are coming out, bigger locomotives, longer locomotives, Class 66s in England and now in Europe, Märklin just released the super big boy, locomotive from American Union Pacific, and they had to change its gauge a bit or its scale a bit, because it's not going to roll on radius 1 curves very well. So why does Märklin keep doing this? Well, again, it goes back to the young person starting has a small area, and most locomotives and the smaller cars that will come with a lot of the older era trains, and most people modern older era trains, radius 1 isn't going to affect it. It's still not truly prototypical or realistic, but then again, no radius is. The narrowest radius on an actual train line in Germany, if you wanted to model it, would be R9, okay? And nobody makes R9 curves. I've heard a couple of companies talk about going up to R6, but at this point you use FlexiTrack. So anyhow, the other reason Märklin gives is that because so many of their customers still have layouts that are based on R1, they want them to be able to buy the new product and still use it on their old layouts. And again, you can see the logic in that. The explanation makes sense. The problem is, a lot of the people that run those old Radius 1 layouts and so forth, they don't tend to buy the new long passenger trains. Some do, but most don't. Now here's where the problem is and why a lot of Märklin people are frustrated. As this hobby both shrinks and grows in odd ways, more and more people in the hobby want pure realism. They want everything to be 100% exact with the availability of the high-end printing and laser cut and CNC. The controversy comes back to a lot of people who use Märklin track and Märklin products are now buying other company passenger cars and some locomotives. Whether in DC with tricks or the true Märklin AC, they're buying the more realistic because, again, companies like Brava makes every passenger car at 187 scale. Pico, I would say, didn't used to, but I think in the last 2-3 years, they are starting to make almost all their longer cars in true 187 scale. Roco, their Railjets, and some of their other more popular modern era high-speed passenger cars are 187 scale. They're not doing the shrunken scale anymore. Fleischmann always did 187 scale. Märklin, along with Pico, and that does shrink. I can't speak for other companies. Pico just, in a subtle way, punched Märklin in the nose last year and this year. First of all, Pico beat Märklin by over a year in getting a model of the newest super duper high speed ICE 4 to market. Pico got a really nice version of the ICE 4 to the stores by early fall last year. September, well, actually that's still summer. September, October, it started hitting shops. Their original 5-car consist. They loaded it up with functions. It's very, very sharp and well done. And it's true 187 scale. Märklin announced last year after hearing Pico was releasing one, hey, we've got one coming. And originally was scheduled to be released May of this year, and then sometime last year they delayed it to late summer, and now they're saying late third quarter Christmas period of this year. We'll see. Pico beat Märklin to the punch, and a lot of people like me debated getting the Pico now, waiting a year for the Märklin. I'm a Märklin guy. I want the Märklin. I fully believe in Märklin quality. Everything I run is Märklin. I believe it integrates better with its own stuff. Pico made a great one. But what happened is a lot of Märklin enthusiasts, guys I know that are Märklin lovers, they said, I'm buying the Pico because it's 187 scale. It's not shrunken down. It's not compacted. The interior and the exterior is true scale. And when Märklin announced theirs was going to be the 193.5, which really is only a couple of millimeters, 3-4 millimeters, half a centimeter in the long run, give or take. That was enough to cause a lot of true Märklin enthusiasts to say, to heck with it, I'm not going to wait for something that is not correct scale, I'm buying the Pico. And I haven't heard a Märklin fan say, oh, the Pico was garbage, I should have waited for the Märklin. They love the Pico, and they love the fact that it's true scale. The only saving grace I have waiting for the Märklin, despite the short, is number one, I'm not that knowledgeable about trains. I'm not a train enthusiast like some people are. I'm not a nuts and bolts counter. I'm not a rivet counter, as they say in some places. If it looks nice and I've ridden on it, I'm buying it. be that as it may, looking at the Märklin prototype that they showed at the toy fair this year, I definitely think they have done some details better than Pico. And that's saying something because Pico really went all out on theirs, but there are some really nice design details, the numbering and the lettering, that I think Märklin is doing better. Does that compensate for the shorter scale? For a lot of people, no. For me, who doesn't really see it as well, it's probably not that big a deal. But Märklin definitely is putting some things that are on the real ICE 4 in the detail that Pico missed or elected to not put in as strongly. Märklin is also adding a few more functions, including operating pantographs. So the pantographs on the Märklin will go up and down when you control it with your mobile station or your central station, where the Pico doesn't do that. Again, trying to entice you with some of the bells and whistles to make up for the lack of accurate scale. So it all comes down to radius 1. On my layout, and just about any layout of people I talk to, we don't use radius 1. Whenever you go to a model train show that sells Märklin parts, or if you go to the Facebook and the online exchanges, where model train enthusiasts get together and sell and trade their stuff. If you go on eBay and look under C-Track and see what's selling, I have 100 pieces, of which 40 of them are radius 1 curves. Just about everybody who does Märklin gets rid of their radius 1 curves. And it's like they'll sell all these other pieces of track you want, but you gotta buy the radius 1 curves as well because they want to get rid of them, and then you turn around and try to get rid of them. Now, I'm not saying completely get rid of radius 1, because definitely a young kid starter set, throw it in there. It is frustrating that Märklin sells Regiobahn double-decker, Doppelstockwagen, that they sell these in starter kits with radius 1 curves, and so they shrink it down to that 1 to 93.5 or even 1 to 95, in some cases 1 to 98 or 1 to 100, which really begins to truly be noticeable. So when all the other companies are going to 187 because they know that's what's out there, Märklin, which about 7 years ago came out of severe financial difficulty and is now booming again, they are actually they're going to lose some sales in some of their passenger cars because of their adherence to the radius 1. Why not throw radius 2 starter kits out there? Why not throw radius 2 curves? Because that's the minimum that a true 187 scale can do, is a 187 curve. Is a radius 2 curve. On my layout, I have 3 full loops. If you've ever looked at my layout, my train table. It's not a layout, it's a train table. I have radius 5 curves and radius 4 curves. On a couple of interior loops, radius 3. And then I only have radius 2 into the parking areas to keep those bends a little narrower when I'm parking the train so I can get more lanes in. But that's it. Radius 1 does not exist on my layout. In my classroom, where I have a 2-foot wide by 4-foot long table, or a 6-foot long table, that I use for my little train layout in my classroom, yes, I use the radius 1 curves, but I'm not running my ICE 3s or my Regiobahns. I just have a couple of little El Cheapo trains and then a Jim Knopf, Jim Button, Emma locomotive, which is really small, so it can handle the radius 1 just fine. I tried to film some stuff while I was still injured. I did have speaking of ICEs, I've got a little video I might tack on to this to show a nice little surprise I found on eBay that did some nice work with my ICE 2. I finally, after years, got it working again and have some extra cars on it to make it look a little more prototypical. Alright, so let's open this up. I mean, I already know what's in it, but you don't. And sometimes there is no gently, but I can't put the strain on my back right now. There we go. Yeah. All right. And if you look at the end there, you might be able to guess already what's in there. Styrofoam may come in use. And there's a 1. And there's 2. Fantastic. All right, we'll just set that aside. Again, this might be useful somewhere, so I'm not going to throw that away. This wrap will also be useful when I send some things off to get done. And there it is. I need to clean it up a bit. It's going to need a little work. Going to have to be careful with that. But what we have here is an ICE2 car to go on my ICE2. Ever since I bought my ICE2, I knew it was short. ICEs come in 8-car consist, 9-car consist, or double 8s, 16. Usually if they're going to split somewhere. They travel as 16 somewhere, and then at certain main hubs they may split. But quite pleased with this, because this will take my ICE2. This will take my ICE2 up to 6 cars, and hopefully I'll get a shot to at least get a couple more. I keep searching eBay and other places, and the gentleman I bought these from says he has a couple more, so I'm looking forward to getting that. All right, so I've got the 2 new cars loaded into the ICE2. So now it doesn't look quite so short. It still needs at least 2 more cars to make it a prototypical consist. But definitely much happier. I finally got this up to an acceptable length, let's say. It doesn't look quite so silly running around as an ICE with just the 4 cars on it. Now it's up to 6, and I'm hoping to get 2 more from this gentleman, at least 2 more. Now this still needs work done to it. I'm going to be sending it off to get it completely lit on the inside once I have all the cars. I haven't sent it all out because I knew I was going to try to expand it. But when I get a couple more cars, I'm going to send it off to get it all lit and get a better chip in it. I've mentioned it pretty much any time I have had my ICE2 on the track over the last few years, although on the show I've only had it running once, and that was the last little surprise running session when my friend Matt came down and fixed it up and videotaped it. So it still has some issues. It's running great, but this was once in my classroom. When I finally got it, I got this for very inexpensive. I got it for cheap. It was new, but it was kind of on clearance, and so I didn't pay a lot for this ICE2. So I put this one in my classroom instead of my ICE3. And it was in my classroom for about a year or so. And it was a great motivational. I had some students that they've never seen model trains. And so all of a sudden I've got a little model train layout with some of these buildings here in my classroom. And they would love to run it. And it was sort of okay, you get your work done,
no fooling around, no silliness, and I'd let them run the train, and the kids loved it. And I had a couple of students that, in this world of video games and everything else, this was just monumentally cool, and they guarded this with their lives. They would not let other students mess with it. If kids were playing around in the classroom, if I was out in the hall during class changes or something, they would be in the classroom guarding it and making sure nobody did anything. But one day, I had some surgery, and I was out a couple of days from work, and had a substitute who wasn't paying attention. It was one of the classes where I didn't have guardians. I always had kids that liked it. And a couple of female students, decided that since the substitute teacher wasn't paying attention, they were going to push the table out of the way so they could plug their phones in and charge them and play with their phones during class. That's one of the dangers when you have a substitute teacher who doesn't pay attention. What they didn't know is that the table actually was a split table and had this layout on it. So when they pulled the table out to move it, only part of the table did. This was on the track, and they dumped the track and the train and bashed it up pretty good. And I fixed what I could, got it running again, but not all the lights work properly. I don't get the directional lights in one direction, and it's just been kind of on the back burner since. But I do have most of the functions working, and hopefully I will be attaching a running session with this as we go. Horn's a little tinny too. I'm going to give this a little test run and run it in, and maybe we will film some of it later. But for now, we're going to let them take off and run those new cars in. And off he goes.
Be safe, and if you're like me, where I'm off work for a few weeks, happy trains. I'll be the same.